There are many monuments in the world that are considered miracles of human engineering. But Christ the Redeemer is not just a monument. It is a mystery that has stood silently among the clouds for almost 100 years. We see it as a calm and motionless statue, but the truth is that it should not have been able to stand there like this at all. Imagine a mountain nearly 700 meters high, surrounded by dense rainforest, slippery rocks, and dangerous storms coming from the Atlantic Ocean. A place where wind speeds can reach up to 200 kilometers per hour. And on that very summit, humans erected a massive statue weighing more than 1,000 tons. But the question is, how? How did people in the 1930s, when there were no modern cranes and no technology like we have today, manage to bring this seemingly impossible structure to the top of the mountain? How were such heavy stone and concrete sections assembled among the clouds to create a monument that still stands strong today despite storms, rain, and lightning strikes? And the biggest question of all, what is hidden inside this gigantic statue? Is it filled with nothing more than concrete? Or is there a secret that has been hidden from human civilization? Why is this monument struck by lightning every year and yet does not shatter into pieces? How do its outstretched arms withstand the pressure of powerful storm winds? And why do many engineers still consider it one of the most impossible constructions of the 20th century? This is not just the story of a religious monument. It is the story of human determination, art, science, and engineering coming together to achieve the impossible. Today, we will discover the story of Christ the Redeemer that will make you think. Today, Christ the Redeemer is not only a symbol of Brazil, but is also seen around the world as a symbol of peace, compassion, and hope. But the story of this monument is not limited to religion or tourism. It began at a time when Brazil itself was trying to define its identity. In the late 19th century and the early 20th century, Brazil was changing rapidly. The political system had changed, the monarchy had come to an end, and the country was moving toward becoming a modern republic. But amid this transformation, there was also a sense of concern. Many religious people felt that society was gradually drifting away from spirituality and faith. During this period, several Catholic groups proposed the idea of building a statue of Jesus Christ on Corcovado Mountain, the massive peak overlooking Rio de Janeiro, so that it would appear as if he were embracing the entire city with open arms. In fact, the idea had first emerged around 1850, when Catholic priest Pedro Maria Bosch asked Princess Isabel of Brazil to support the construction of such a monument. But at that time, the dream remained only an idea. Later, in 1889, Brazil became a republic, and the church and the state were separated. After that, the chances of the project being built became even smaller. But some dreams do not fade with time. They simply wait for the right moment. In the 1920s, Brazil was preparing to celebrate 100 years of its independence. At the same time, the Catholic Circle of Rio launched a major campaign called Semana do Monumento, or Monument Week. Donations were collected from people across the country. This was not just a project funded by the wealthy. Thousands of ordinary Catholic families also contributed. Some gave a little money, some provided materials, and others simply offered their support. Gradually, the idea spread like a national movement, and large amounts of donations were collected. But now the biggest question was, what would the statue actually look like? In the beginning, several different designs were proposed. Some people wanted Christ to be shown holding a globe, so that he would appear as the king of the world. Other designs featured a cross in his hands. But eventually the engineers and artists arrived at a design that would set this monument apart from every other statue in the world: the outstretched arms of Jesus Christ. A pose that, when seen from a distance, looks as if the entire world is being embraced, and perhaps that became the monument's greatest strength. Because it does not simply represent power, it creates a feeling of protection, peace, and compassion. But turning this beautiful idea into reality was not easy. The location chosen for the monument was one of the most challenging construction sites in the world. A 700-meter-high granite mountain rising above the sea, dense rainforest on all sides, slippery rock surfaces, constantly changing weather, and powerful winds that could destabilize any large structure. Today, visitors can reach the site using trains, elevators, and escalators. But in the 1920s, transporting construction materials, there was nothing short of a nightmare. Carrying cement, steel, stone, and heavy machinery to the top of the mountain was a major challenge in itself. Even so, engineers, artists, and workers began work on this seemingly impossible project. The real challenge was not just to create a beautiful monument, but to build a structure that could remain standing for decades despite the constant forces of nature. And this is where the greatest engineering project of Brazilian engineer Heitor da Silva Costa begins. In the 1920s, when plans for the monument were being developed, the biggest question was what material should be used to build it. At that time, many of the world's most famous structures were being constructed with steel. Many people wanted this monument to use a steel framework as well, similar to the one used in the Eiffel Tower. But Silva Costa knew that the conditions on Corcovado Mountain were nothing like those in Paris. The ocean was extremely close. The air constantly carried moisture and salt. Heavy rain and storms were common on the mountain. Engineers feared that if steel were used, it would begin to corrode after a few decades, and the entire structure would require continuous maintenance. It was here that Silva Costa made a decision that many people at the time considered extremely risky. Instead of steel, he chose reinforced concrete. Today, reinforced concrete seems like a common material, but in that era, using it to build such a complex structure at such a height was almost unheard of. Concrete was strong, but it was also extremely heavy. If its balance and internal stresses were not managed correctly, the entire structure could weaken under its own weight. That is why the responsibility for the structural calculations was given to French engineer Albert Caquot, who was considered one of the world's greatest structural engineers at the time. His job was not only to support the weight of the monument, but also to calculate how much pressure the powerful winds at an elevation of 700 meters would place on the structure. Because the outstretched arms of Christ the Redeemer were not just an artistic design, they were an engineering nightmare. During storms, the arms catch the wind like enormous sails. At times, the structure could be subjected to hundreds of kilograms of pressure per square meter. The engineers knew that even a small error in their calculations could make the monument unstable at such a great height. But the challenge was not only about strength, it was also about precision. The concrete had to be cast in such a way that no air bubbles formed inside it, the pressure remained evenly distributed throughout the structure, and the surface appeared smooth. Now imagine all of this taking place on a mountain where the weather could change every few minutes. At one moment, there would be bright sunshine, then dense fog, and suddenly heavy rain and strong winds. During this time, engineers in Brazil were studying the mountain and rock conditions, while thousands of kilometers away in Paris, the artistic form of the statue was being created. Silva Costa understood that if the concrete was to have not only strength but also dignity, he would need a great sculptor. That is why he chose the French artist Paul Landowski. Landowski did not create his work while standing on the mountain in Rio. Inside his studio in Europe, he produced life-size plaster models of Christ's head and hands. The statue's head was made approximately 3.75 meters tall, while each hand was about 3.2 meters long. But these models could not be shipped to Brazil in a single piece. Therefore, they were cut into dozens of smaller sections so that negative molds could be created from them. Then began the most difficult phase of the project. These molds were loaded onto ships and transported across the Atlantic Ocean to Rio de Janeiro. There, at the mountaintop, reinforced concrete was poured into the molds. In other words, every part of the statue was being built separately and would later be assembled into a single structure. It was like a giant three-dimensional puzzle. Every numbered block had to fit perfectly onto the pre-designed internal metal framework. Because the engineers knew that if there was even a mistake of a few millimeters at the base, the entire project could be ruined. Now imagine that construction site in 1926. At that time, there were no paved roads, no giant cranes, and no helicopters like we have today. The only way to reach the mountaintop was the old Corcovado Railway, which had been built in the late 19th century. Cement, sand, water, scaffolding, tools, and even the plaster molds that arrived from Paris, everything had to be transported uphill in those small railway cars. And after that, workers had to manually haul these heavy materials from the railway to the construction site. At times, the entire mountain would disappear into the cloud. Visibility would drop to almost nothing. Workers stood on slippery scaffolding pouring concrete while a drop of hundreds of feet stretched below them. The space at the summit was so limited that large amounts of material could not be stored there. The construction site had to operate like a perfectly coordinated machine. Whatever arrived in the morning had to be installed or cast by the evening. The workers lived in extreme isolation. They were often surrounded by clouds that made the scaffolding slippery and nearly invisible. But the most astonishing part is that despite the dangers of the site and the absence of modern safety harnesses, not a single fatal construction accident was officially recorded during the 9 years of construction. For that era, it was a remarkable engineering achievement. We often look at Christ the Redeemer from a distance and assume that it is a giant solid block of concrete. But the truth is completely different. The statue is hollow inside. Technically, it functions like a 12-story hollow structure, hiding an extremely complex internal framework within it. Inside the monument is a network of pillars, metal supports, and diagonal beams that distribute its entire weight and transfer it down to the foundation. And this foundation is not built on ordinary ground. It is anchored directly into the granite rock of Corcovado Mountain. In other words, the statue is not simply standing on the mountain. It is connected to the mountain itself. There is also a narrow metal staircase inside the monument, allowing access from the feet all the way up to the arms and head. The passageways are so tight that in many places only one person can pass through at a time. From the outside, the monument appears calm and majestic, but inside it feels more like an industrial structure. Metal frameworks, curved walls, concrete supports, and dark, narrow corridors combine to make it feel like a mysterious hidden cave. But there is something hidden within this structure that very few people know about. Around chest level inside the statue, there is a small heart-shaped structure. This was not an accidental design. engineer Heitor da Silva Costa intentionally included it. It was coated and finished with the same care as the rest of the monument. It cannot be seen from the ground. Tourists never notice it. But perhaps Silva Costa wanted to leave a hidden signature inside the monument. A small secret for future engineers and restorers, concealed from the outside world. But making the statue strong was not enough. The real challenge was protecting it from the weather. Reinforced concrete is extremely strong, but over time it can develop cracks. Heat, moisture, and constant rainfall can gradually weaken concrete. Silva Costa knew that if the monument was to survive for decades, it would need a protective outer skin. And that is where he found the answer in soapstone, also known as steatite. This stone was found in large quantities in the mines of Brazil's Minas Gerais region. The most remarkable quality of soapstone was that it was relatively soft when extracted from the quarry, making it easy to cut and shape. But after exposure to air and moisture, the same stone became extremely hard and highly resistant to weather. But now a new problem emerged. How could such a massive and curved surface be covered? No large stone slab could fit perfectly onto a structure of this shape. So the engineers came up with a remarkably unique solution. The soapstone was cut into millions of small triangular pieces. Each piece was about 3 centimeters wide and roughly 1 centimeter thick. In total, nearly 6 million small soapstone tiles were used. But attaching them one by one to the monument was almost impossible. So Silva Costa sought help from the churches and local communities of Rio de Janeiro. Thousands of women carefully glued these small triangular pieces by hand onto sheets of canvas paper. Later, these sheets were transported to the mountaintop and applied to fresh cement like wallpaper. And perhaps this is the most emotional part of the entire story. Many of these women wrote the names of their husbands, sons, or family members on the back of the tiles. Some wrote small prayers, while others wrote their secret wishes. In other words, hidden beneath the outer surface of Christ, the Redeemer, are not just stone tiles, but also the personal memories and emotions of thousands of people permanently sealed inside. From a technical perspective, this monument is not a single stone structure. It is a protective layer made up of millions of small soapstone pieces that reflect light differently throughout the day. Sometimes it appears light gray, sometimes white, and sometimes golden in the glow of the sunset. And perhaps that is why this monument feels like more than just an engineering marvel. It feels as though it was built not only with stone, but with patience, precision, and human emotion. But Christ, the Redeemer's greatest battle, began after it was completed. Standing alone on the summit of Corcovado Mountain, the monument is extremely close to the sky. And that means it becomes a target for lightning strikes countless times every year. During the rainy season, the storms that form over Rio de Janeiro turn Corcovado Mountain into a massive lightning hotspot. At times, clouds gather directly around the statue, and within seconds, powerful bolts of lightning strike the monument. But the engineers understood this danger from the very beginning. If such powerful electrical energy were to travel directly through the structure, it could create cracks in the monument, damage the surface, or even harm the entire structure. That is why an advanced lightning protection system was built into it. The entire monument essentially functions like a giant Faraday cage. Lightning conductors are installed inside the statue's crown, arms, and fingers. As soon as lightning strikes, the system channels that energy through the internal metal framework and down into the granite foundation below. In other words, millions of volts of electricity are discharged directly into the mountain. But the power of tropical storms is so intense that even this protection system cannot always completely protect the outer surface of the monument. The soapstone layer is especially vulnerable to direct lightning impacts. In some cases, the heat generated by a lightning strike is so powerful that pieces of soapstone are instantly vaporized. In 2014, one such powerful lightning strike damaged part of the thumb on the statue's right hand. Images of the damage spread around the world. But the real challenge was not the damage itself, it was the repair. Because repairing a monument standing at such a height is nothing like ordinary construction work. Specialist craftsmen are brought in, many of whom are also professional climbers. They have to descend from the statue's head using ropes. At times, they hang hundreds of feet above the ground as they make their way to the massive arms, where even standing is extremely difficult. And perhaps the most fascinating detail is that the same original soapstone used during the monument's construction in the 1930s is still used for repairs today. Stone reserves from the same historic quarry in Brazil were specifically preserved for future restoration work, ensuring that new repairs would perfectly match the original surface. On October 12, 1931, when the monument was officially unveiled to the world for the first time, people were amazed. The monument was the result of 9 years of calculations, millions of hand-cut stone pieces, and the efforts of thousands of people who transformed a remote mountain into one of the most recognizable symbols in the world. If you ever get the opportunity to see it up close, do not just take a few photographs and leave. Take a moment to pause, feel the winds that flow across the mountain, and think about how far human imagination can go when it is combined with passion, art, and engineering. By the way, which country are you watching this video from? And would you like to visit the Christ the Redeemer statue of Jesus Christ someday? Let us know in the comments. Please support us by liking and sharing this video. And for more fascinating documentaries like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. Thank you.